That was a tremendous introduction. I hope I don't disappoint. I need to be extremely grateful. Thank you for having me. And thank you all for listening to me. I'm always astonished that people will listen to me, but thank you for doing that. And I have to thank the Common Land Foundation. We've been working together now for some time. And I think that this model is a very interesting model because it's bringing to the table something that's been missing in conservation. And I have to thank many people who have helped me on this path for a long time. I'm sorry. So I'm going to talk about the great work of our time. And I think that over the last 20 years, I have been looking at the Loess Pleatue initially, and then all over the world. And what I found was that historically, human beings have massively degraded the ecosystems. And that this is the basis of enormous civilizations, but then these civilizations fail because they don't understand. So this is what it should look like in a system, and this is what it ends up looking like when we destroy it. And over the last 20 years, so 20 years ago, I was asked by the World Bank to film the baseline study. And I found that the cradle of Chinese civilization had been fundamentally ecologically destroyed. So it really had virtually no vegetation. So it's interesting because you see this in so many places here in the Middle East. And there were different kinds of indicators, like the gullies. So the gullies, when you see these gullies and washes, you know actually that there's water, because that's the creation of this. And we also saw that the relentless grazing is the end game, which basically takes out the last remaining biodiversity. And what this does is it changes everything. And we found that the people were trapped in a cycle of poverty and degradation. And so the more they produced in this unsustainable methods, the worse the situation became. So they're very loud. So the Chinese decided they were going to do something about this. They were growing in the East Coast with their industrialization, and they were getting more wealthy there, but this pocket of poverty was there. So they used a number of methods. They used participatory assessment to engage the local communities so that they were able to bring all of the people into the transformation. They also used another method which worked well. They paid them. This works extremely well. So they substituted or subsidized the transition from Neolithic agriculture to a new sustainable agricultural model over about 10 years. $500 million were invested over a 10-year period in an area of 35,000 square kilometers. So this is about the size of Holland. So actually, per hectare or per capita, the investment was very small. It was an integrated approach. It used the infiltration and retention of rainfall, the development after you made physical interventions of biological interventions, so massive planting, many perennials. But essentially what was happening was they were moving the people away from poverty and away from the Neolithic agricultural methods that had caused the damage. So all of the negative behaviors were banned. All of the positive new behaviors were taught and were subsidized so that at the end of the development period, the people had learned new behaviors and the old behaviors had been lost. They were just memories from the past. And the outcomes were fairly significant. I started to get these various fellowships that he talked about because of the change.
When I first filmed Mr. Tafu Yuen and his colleagues back in 1995, I had no idea this initiative could achieve such dramatic results. The effort that people put into converting their slopes into terraces has resulted in a marked increase in agricultural productivity.
Now, what's
The
interesting?
higher yields are directly related to the return of natural vegetation in the surrounding ecological land.
So what's most interesting about this is they could increase productivity by reducing the area in cultivation. So it both affects the ecology and the socioeconomic impacts. And it massively increased infiltration and retention of rainfall. And I think you'd have to admit that in arid and semi-arid regions, this is what we have to do. So this made me very philosophical. And I was asked to share this information in different parts of the world, and I have been doing that consistently. But I also started to think, if I'm looking at degraded states, I wonder what it looks like in a functional ecosystem. And it became something that I really was getting a little bit depressed by how much of the landscape was degraded, and I started going all over the world, and I've been to over 90 countries around the world, and I've been asked to share what I've understood in different places. I usually wear my hat, but what I found was that in perfect systems, this is the Andrews Experimental Forest on the McKenzie River in Oregon, is that there's enormous amounts of organic material. And that the microbial communities that live in the soil are enormous. And that the canopy height is really high. Here it's 95 meters high. So if you imagine that the biomass itself is between 70 and 90% of water, that's where the storage of water is. It's not simply in geologic areas or in flow rates. And the biodiversity is enormous. So it doesn't look at all like monocultures. It's a polyculture. This is Amman, and you see that everywhere there's actually water. And the water comes out of the side of the earth. And we've seen now that you can go to places where there are ephemeral flows, and within a few years you can return perennial flows. This is Russia. These are peatlands. This is very rare now to see these kinds of things. This is where the carbon is. This is where the water is. This is in Borneo. So these systems that are so wonderful, we need to look at them, and we need to look in awe at this. And we need to realize that if we get in our mind what is actual wealth, where life, where air, water, food, energy come from, then in hundreds of years from now, all this can come back. There is no reason, there's nothing wrong with the earth. Human beings have a problem. The earth is in very good shape. And These systems, we have to understand that it's the symbiosis of all these things, and we need to involve everyone. And what I've seen is now all over the world, there are people who are learning this. This is dune stabilization. You can stop sands and create soil simply by putting organic material into the sand. All the water will flow down the sands. Bacteria will begin to deteriorate this. Birds will fly up and leave their droppings. Seeds will go there, and vegetation will return. You don't have to plant it. And there's so many wonderful techniques. We need to aggregate these. What we're talking about now, there's a number of young people who are here in this room, and there are people who all over the world want to help to do this. This is organic compost. We need to understand the percentages and total amounts of organic matter in the soil are the determinant for soil moisture, for soil fertility. The microbiologic communities are the basis of all life. We are symbiotic relationships with unknown numbers, trillions of bacteria. And this is what we have to process, and we have to do this not as experts. We have to do this as a species. We are human beings. We are not consumers. We're human beings, and we have to act as a species on a planetary scale. This is Rene Holler. He's taking massively degraded mine areas and restoring them. These are nurseries in China. And they're excellent techniques. We need to aggregate all those techniques. We're talking about joining with everyone, and especially with Her Royal Highness and with the permaculture world. There are many, many young people around the world who understand this deeply, and their work is going well. This is in South Africa. Jim Aronson was also at this meeting, others. And all over the world, there are people who are working on these things. We need to share this information. We need to collaborate. What we think is important too is that we have to realize that this is the basis of wealth. We're now saying that wealth is coming from products, and that we need to produce more and sell more in order to have more wealth. This is simply untrue. Wealth comes from the functionality of the natural systems. That's where our air, our water, our food, our energy come from. And what we need to do is do less. We need to spend more time under the fig tree drinking lemonade with our families. And then we won't be creating waste and pollution. We won't be destroying things. We'll be maintaining it. But we have to recognize this. We have to tell the truth. Money is not coming from more stuff. The person who dies with the most things doesn't win. And we have to have spiritual life. We have to respect each other, and we have to look at the world as it is. And in doing this, we'll be able to answer many of the historical problems. And there's vast areas, as has already been said, around the world where we can do this type of restoration, and it must engage everyone. It is the new industry.
I only know that we have to work fast to get a model ready for companies, investors, and states, governments to restore landscapes.
This is Willem Ferreira, the CEO of Common Land.
So what I propose is that we go to a system where we have 4 returns per hectare. And that a financial return or an investment return is a logical thing. But there are other 3 returns. The return of natural capital, the return of nature, we could say here. The return of jobs, very important, because we are talking about people who want to work or need to work and want to live well. But maybe the most important is return of inspiration on capital, or return of inspiration. If you bring the return of inspiration back in the landscape, it will bring back a return of meaningfulness in people themselves.
So somehow we have to find this way. This is in Portugal, and it's a Mediterranean biome. And it's interesting, they're able to rehydrate a dehydrated biome. So we're starting to see and understand what are the techniques which we can use to do this at scale. And we need to consider this and wonder what will happen. And we need to engage large numbers of people. These are not really big engineering things. These are small engineering things when you realize it. And they're done by ordinary people, and more they're being done by highly educated people from the developed world who are sick of the materialism and the way of life there, and it's changing the life there. And it's showing what is possible when you understand how the natural systems function. And we have to align our behavior with the natural ecological functions. And when we do, we understand that all the moisture is infiltrated. It's not runoff, it's not a pipe, it's not a sewer. It's part of a natural living system which nurtures all life. And this is what we have to understand. We have to see that when you're in this type of community, when you're doing this kind of work, it's really fun. And it's really productive. And it's really satisfying. And it's really healthy. And you get a lot of food. And you create a resiliency in your family, in your community, in your country. And you get a next generation that has no neurosis, that has no fear, and that loves peace and wants to live in peace. And this is what we need. So I think we can also grow peace through ecology. And I think it's almost lunchtime, so I think we all know that we want to respect those who grow the food. And we want to eat healthy food. We do not want polluted food. And we can have this. But to do this, we have to take the science, and we have to take the money and the business ability, and we must bring it together with the people.
In last 30 years, my Indian Rajasthani community generate 7 rivers.
And we can see perennial flows in 6 to 10 years in areas where flows have gone ephemeral. And we have to understand that all organic material must be returned. And we must go to other types of energy because the oil and fossil fuel age is finished. And we can't even burn the existing carbon reserves because we'll change the climate too much to survive. So I found in this work, it's infinitely fascinating. There's nothing that we need to look here and to realize we're related to every other living thing. We are stardust, and we have a great opportunity. It's a dangerous time in human history, but it's also the best opportunity we've ever had for a quantum leap in human consciousness. So thank you for listening to me. I'm always astonished that you're willing to do that, but hi, thank you again.